How can you survive hypothermia? How do we treat a chest injury like this? And what are the things we look out for after a severe head injury? Welcome back to doc.offcall, I'm Dr. Maddie, and today we're going to be answering all of these questions and so much more as we take a look at the One Piece anime. Now, we're just shy of 100,000 subscribers, and I want to say a big thank you to everyone who's supported the channel so far. And if you're new here, why not stick around and consider subscribing if you enjoy my anime-based videos. Now, in addition to answering all these questions, we're also going to be calculating the medical costs for all the treatments that Luffy would have required in the series so far. So make sure to stick around to the end of this video to find out that eye-watering amount. With that being said, let's put Luffy up on the screen, and if you're ready, let's begin. So, first up, Luffy's been stung in the face by a bee, and his face is completely swollen up. Now, this is a classical sign that we call angioedema, and it commonly occurs with allergic reactions. And although it looks really severe, if you took a couple of antihistamine tablets, it will help to bring all that swelling down. And you can buy these from the pharmacy for a couple of dollars, so no need to see a doctor just yet. Oh, okay, so this is where Luffy gets his iconic scar under his eye. Now, the danger here is the possibility of that knife injuring the orbit of the eye. But fortunately, we know he misses the eye, otherwise he'd be walking around with an eye patch like a real pirate. But he'd still need some stitches to close that up neatly, and this would come in at a cost of anywhere between $300 to $3,000. Now, you might be asking yourself what dictates that cost, and it comes down to the size and the location. With it being under the eye, you're probably going to need a plastic surgeon to have a look, and they don't come cheap. Oh, okay, so a further laceration to the side of his face. Again, almost taking out that eye. Now, these lacerations look a bit more superficial than those self-inflicted by Luffy, so I hope they wouldn't need any stitches. You might get away with some glue or some steri strips. The good thing is you can buy these steri strips over the counter for about $5, so you don't need to pay for a doctor's fee. Oh gosh, okay, so several lacerations up and down the body with what look like Freddy Krueger's hands. Again, these are probably causing far deeper lacerations which will need stitches, costing another $3,000. But it also looks like Luffy might need a tetanus jab because those blades don't look like they've been cleaned in quite a while. Anyway, the cost of a tetanus jab is going to put you back another $60. Oh, okay, so here we have some penetrating trauma to the body with these sharp projectiles. Remember to never pull these out because they can worsen the injury and cause you to bleed far more. If they're going to be taken out, it's best done in a hospital when you're attached to an IV drip and you're in the operating room, so that if anything does go wrong, the surgeons can correct it there and then. But of course that's not going to be free, and the average for a trauma stay in the hospital is going to be between $12,000 to $20,000. Also, Luffy's punched this shield-like structure and he's probably fractured some of the bones in his hand. So he's going to need an x-ray to confirm this, and that comes in at a cost of $250. But often boxer's fractures aren't operated on so long as the bones aren't sticking out and the bones are in line. Oh god, a shark attack. Now, sharks can have a bite force of up to 2 tons, which means they could literally tear a human apart. So fortunately, being flexible and made of rubber is really in Luffy's favour here. But what I'd be worried about here is if Arlong is bitten into the carotid artery that supplies the brain. And also, it's important to mention that bites like this can put you at risk of infection, and with that site being close to the brain, I'd be worried about meningitis. So Luffy's definitely going to need some antibiotics that are going to come in at a cost between $20 and $75. For Arlong, on the other hand, he may need to book in with the ENT doctors to see about that nose. So, taking a cannonball, but Luffy looks in pretty good shape despite taking that straight on. As a minimum, I'd be worried about the secondary effects of an explosion like that, such as causing a perforation to your eardrums. And if these haven't healed within 4 weeks, Luffy would need to see one of the ENT doctors to get these repaired, at a cost of anywhere between $3,000 to $4,000.
この俺を誰だと思ってる。てめえのような口先だけのルーキーなんざ。
Oh god, it's hard to believe that Luffy could survive an impalement injury like this. But fortunately, it looks like Crocodile's hit the left side of his abdomen, where there's far less vital structures. At worst, he's perforated his stomach, which has led to internal bleeding. Now, in a situation like this, there's no time to put Luffy through a scanner. He'd need to be rushed to the operating room for a surgeon to perform a laparotomy. This would involve cutting him open and having a look at what's damaged. And you guessed it, it's going to be an expensive one, between $16,000 and $20,000. Oh, face planting the counter. Luffy is just far too trusting. But this is why you should never accept a drink from a stranger. Of course though, you'd be worried about facial bone fractures, and the most common one being the nose, which you can normally tell just by looking at it. But you'd still need to confirm it by getting an x-ray, coming in at a cost of $250. Now you can either choose to align it there and then, or you can book yourself in for a septoplasty at a cost between $6,000 to $12,000. So it's pretty clever how Enel figured out a way to damage Luffy, with rubber being his natural weakness. But it looks like by touching his staff, Luffy has sustained some pretty bad scalds to his hands and feet. And he's got the right idea of blowing on them, but really he's going to have to put his hands and feet in cold water for at least 20 minutes. And if the skin begins to blister, he's going to need to go and see a doctor. Oh god, okay, so taking a slash to the chest wall from Zoro. But it kind of looks like the type of injury you'd sustain from using a reverse blade sword, a bit like from the Kenshin anime. Really, looking at this wound, it's quite difficult to determine the extent of the injury, as we don't really see any blood splatter. Mind you, the skin on the front of the chest is quite thin, and so if you sustain a laceration, it's quite difficult to stitch back together, and people often end up with quite a poor cosmetic result, with quite significant scarring. So, Luffy with an afro, he should really wear his hair more often like that. But here we see he takes multiple blows from the head from Foxy, who doesn't really seem to be that strong an opponent. The thing I'm slightly worried about is a mild concussion, which can manifest with a headache, confusion or mild amnesia, but there's not really much I can do about that. If he'd been KO'd, I might be a bit more worried and get a head scan, but Foxy doesn't really worry me as an opponent for Luffy.
やっぱりおめえは変わり者だ。本気で俺に勝つ気でいたのか? Oh gosh, that is a deep freeze for Luffy. Now, hypothermia is a really serious condition and shouldn't be underestimated. It can actually be so bad that it can lead to a cardiac arrest. And really the only way of reversing this is by slowly rewarming your patient.
and we can do this by giving warm IV fluids, insulating blankets and observation, but this needs to be done in an intensive care environment. Now because that involves very intensive treatment and observation, it comes at a cost of $30,000 a night, and he'll probably need 2 nights stay, so an eye-watering cost of $60,000.
お前を倒す算段はつけてきた。クラッシュダイヤル。ほら、そんな打ち開けてるとやけどすんぞ。
So, what a laughable attempt from Usopp to take down Luffy. Although I think Sogeking might have had a chance. Now I guess the fire breath is quite concerning, so he might want to get something like Tums to help settle that, which you can buy over the counter.
違う。島の外まで飛べ。
Oh god, again, penetrating trauma to the abdomen, but once again it's on the left side, so I'm less worried about vital organs. You know what though, I think the doctor's going to be a bit fed up with seeing Luffy. I wonder whether Luffy's flexible enough to move around his organs so that he doesn't sustain any critical damage. This time round, as Luffy's still conscious, I think it would be appropriate to get him a CT scan to help determine the damage, and this is going to come in at a cost between $5,000 to $10,000. Oh, okay, so Luffy's been effectively squashed and crushed in this attack. And with an attack like this, you'd be worried about multiple crush injuries to several of his bones. So it's normally in these instances that we perform what's called a skeletal survey, where we practically x-ray everything. Now unfortunately, because there's so many x-rays, it comes at a cost of $600. And that's not including any surgery he might need for any broken bones they find.
こいつ本物だ。
So I remember watching this scene thinking that it was a real turning point in the series, but I can't help but think that Luffy's going to come away from this with some PTSD. Now, psychological therapies like counselling have been shown to be quite effective with sufferers of PTSD, but unfortunately this doesn't come cheap. Really, you're looking at a cost around $150 per hour, and you might end up needing about 50 hours. So I wonder if he can save some money and ask Dr. Chopper to be his therapist.
これが貴様への刑罰だ。これだけ重複した毒に解毒の術はない。24時間苦しみ。
Okay, so Luffy has been poisoned in this scene. Now, I'm not sure if that's a life-threatening poison or just a poison that makes you feel incredibly ill. But once someone's been poisoned, the only real hope is by giving them an antidote, which helps to counteract the effects of the poison. And if we don't have an antidote, the only way of managing people is supportively, so giving pain relief or fluids, depending on what symptoms they've got. For Luffy, I'd assume that we don't have an antidote, and he's probably going to be in a world of pain.
どけたちに
So I like how this character is constantly smoking stogies. He kind of reminds me of Arnold.
I smoke my stogie anywhere I want.
But that hit that Luffy takes to the face and neck, in a normal person I'd be worried about a neck fracture, so I'd really want to be getting a CT scan, which comes in at a cost of $5,000. And if there is a break, Luffy's going to need to walk around with one of these bolted to his head for a while, at a cost of $4,000. Oh, okay, so Blackbeard smacks Luffy straight to the ground on his head with enough force to shatter the concrete below. Now, looking at this impact again, we would class this as a major head injury, and I'd really be worried about a basal skull fracture. Interestingly, people who have these might develop something called battle sign, where you get bruising behind the ears. This tells us that the mastoid bones in this area might be fractured, and people might also demonstrate bruising under both of their eyes that tell us there might be bleeding on the brain. So Luffy's going to need a head scan at a cost of $5,000, and he's going to need 24 hours of observation in the hospital at $12,000 a night. Unfortunately, that's what you get when you mess with Blackbeard. Oh gosh, so we got both Jinbei and Luffy taking trauma here. Fortunately, it looks like both of those wounds have been cauterized by the mechanism of their injury. So for Jinbei, it looks like he's going to need to get that abdominal wound looked at, and for Luffy, it looks like he might have sustained either a second or third degree burn. Now normally burns of this degree need to be managed in a burn centre by a plastic surgeon, as he may need to go on and have skin grafts depending on the extent of his injury, and these come in at a cost of anywhere between $2,000 to $6,000, depending on the size that's needed. Okay, so we see that Dr. Trafalger Law is going to need to operate on Luffy, and he said that Luffy's lost a lot of blood and that he wouldn't need an anesthesia because it's unlikely he'd be able to feel anything. This makes me think that Luffy's likely sustained a third degree burn to his chest wall, where all of the nerve fibres have been completely, irreversibly damaged, which makes everything feel numb. So, as we said, he's going to need some skin grafting for that chest wall and several pints of blood to top him back up, as well as a stay on the intensive care unit. So the blood transfusion is going to be between $1,000 to $3,000 per unit, and the stay in intensive care is going to be $30,000 a night. Gosh, you'd spend less spending a night in the Burj Khalifa. God, Luffy can't stop getting bitten by sharks, but like before, the same structures are at risk, as well as the risk of infection. But interestingly, did you know that most sharks have between 5 to 15 rows of teeth? And some whale sharks can have up to 3,000 teeth in their mouth. Pretty scary stuff.
Katakuri!
Okay, pretty interesting. So Caesar is able to remove all of the oxygen from his surrounding environment, depending on whether you're within his range. Now yes, that would cause anyone who's trapped within that range to die from asphyxiation and suffocation. However, he's come up to the one opponent who can stretch his neck out of that range while still fighting in close quarters. So I would guess that none of this is likely to cause any long-term damage for Luffy. Oh god, so further penetrating trauma to the abdomen. But fortunately this time round, Luffy's been able to use his haki power to help reduce the damage. And once again, as he's been hit in the left upper quadrant, he's incredibly lucky. He might have sustained some damage to his stomach, possibly the pancreas, and if he's been really unlucky, maybe the kidney. Nonetheless, a further CT scan is appropriate to help determine any further injuries. Oh gosh, that kick from Sanji sends Luffy flying, and it also sends a tooth flying out of his mouth. Now, I'm not sure how old Luffy is, but I'm guessing that's one of his adult teeth, which means there's no way of replacing it other than having a dental implant. Now, dental implants can cost up to $6,000, but with Luffy being a pirate, I assume he'd want a gold one, which would take you up to $10,000 per implant. Oh, okay, I'm not sure what it was that hit Luffy's thigh there, but it was significant enough to cause him to fall to his knees. Now we've already covered what we would do for an impalement injury like this, but what about his knee? Well, for your knee to suddenly collapse and give way like that, you'd be worried about damage to the tendons or ligaments, and the only real way of assessing that is by getting an MRI scan. This will help to assess both the soft tissues as well as the hard tissues like bone, and it comes in at a cost of around $5,000. Okay, so finally it's the fight between Luffy and Kaido, and if you haven't seen this fight, it's absolutely epic. I think he lost twice before finally defeating him. And in one of those defeats, Luffy takes Kaido's mace to the head, causing blunt force trauma and potentially a skull fracture and bleeding on the brain. Now, if there's significant bleeding in the brain, this can cause an increase in pressure in the skull, and people need to have urgent surgery to take out that blood. And this can either involve drilling holes through the skull or performing something called a craniotomy. As you'd imagine, this is really complicated surgery and is reflected in the price, coming in anywhere between $30,000 to $100,000. So in total, this is Luffy's incredible, eye-watering medical bill. What would that be in Berry? Okay guys, which character would you like me to break down next? Leave your recommendations down in the comments below. But otherwise, if you've enjoyed this video, you might want to watch one of these two. Otherwise, we're really close to 100,000 subscribers, so please give this video a like and consider subscribing. As always, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks.